Well, hey, this is Gavin.
Do you have to clap?
I don't clap. So, no, you clap for the youth podcast?
Yeah, so that they have like a point to like sync it up.
Oh, no, they figured it out. They're all smart about that.
I love this beginning.
This
is
is
my
Gavin
favorite
Conversations, a regular podcast here at Woodlands Church where we don't clap. I'm Dave Bondison with co-host Whitney Swenson, who's having the time of her life. And our guest this week is Justin Armstrong. So,
is that camera working?
Yeah,
oh,
they're
okay.
on. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I don't want to wave and then everybody's watching over my shoulder.
Everybody's listening.
Who's Justin waving to?
On a podcast.
Filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Yes. So cheers. Yeah. And Justin, you and Gabby, we've talked about this in the podcast before, have a youth podcast that happens on a regular weekly basis. Mm-hmm. And your set is going to be changing soon too, right? So, you guys don't let your set change?
No. If ours is changing, yours is changing.
So
yeah, I mean, sure.
Yeah,
okay, I'm fine with that.
One of these weeks, for those of you who watch on the YouTube, you'll see everything's changing around here. We're getting rid of the table for one. So
completely?
I think so. I don't know.
Probably because we just touch it too much. They're like, stop it.
It's too much noise.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a little bit more casual atmosphere. And cool. There's been some thought, and the smart people, the creative people are blessing this. So it'll feel a little different. It's going to be great coming up. So Justin, first time on season 4. Welcome. So
season 4.
Okay. Does it feel, so we're in November. It's Veterans Day today.
It is.
November 11th. The green grass, the warm weather. I have no concept that Thanksgiving is 2 weeks away.
3 weeks, I think, probably.
Okay. I started like the week of.
Late this year. Yeah.
It's so late, but also just like that is opener that is 2 weeks away.
Yeah.
Hunting opener. Yep. That's wild to me.
Yeah, that's true. It does feel
gross.
Weird.
So when you say we're first time on season 2, I'm like.
And every time I look at the 10-day forecast, it's like it's not going to get cooler.
Mm-hmm. I know, but it's actual fall weather, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be.
Because it's like 50s, which feels like fall weather.
Yeah, it's going to start.
You go outside in your t-shirt and you're like, oh, I'm way too chilly, but you don't. I feel like normally here in the fall, it's like, well, I need my full winter jacket at this point.
Yeah.
We have several herbs that are in like planters that last year Brian brought in, and we have a wood stove in our basement that's an unfinished basement, but it's next to a egress window, so we get a ton, and it's southern exposure, so we get a ton of winter sun in that one window. And last year they were already like growing inside on that window, and they are still outside green, like they have not frozen yet.
Yeah, it's
insane.
It's a mess. Yeah. So I think I am uncomfortable with the weather. I don't know what that means. I want it to be normal, and it's not normal. So
I haven't thought about it.
The weather.
Now I'm like, I'll probably think about it all day.
Sorry.
Yeah, we ruined.
There's better things to think about. Season 4. The question for season 4.
So, guest question for you, Justin, is what pieces of media have been forming you recently? So, usually that's books. That might be books, but it could be TV shows or podcasts or music or things like that. But what's been shaping you or forming you or grabbing your heart recently?
Yeah, I would say in the like Christian realm of content, the Bible Project podcast, specifically the classrooms, has been really formative.
That's what Gabby said too.
Which makes sense. We intentionally coordinated. So we did a lot of, I don't know if she had said this, but we went back in, I don't know. I like starting to plan the next ministry year in like February mentally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gives me a month or two to kind of think through, throw around some ideas. And then Gabby and I got together and we were like, what are you thinking? What am I thinking? And then we spent months putting together a plan for this year. And we got to a certain point in the plan where we're like, okay, this all looks really great. We need to pick some themes to make it feel cohesive. So it's not this like random thing happening, which I think you and John do on Sundays.
Yeah.
And as we started talking about themes, some of the Bible Project themes came out really strong. And so at that point, I hadn't listened to a ton. I hadn't done any of their classrooms. I hadn't really listened to the podcast. And so because the 2 biggest themes that we came to were heaven and earth and choices and tests, we had agreed on like, let's let that be our main learning area. Because we both have like different sources that we use, but it's helpful in teaching. Like you probably find this out with David and Lauren with small groups. And then you probably find this out with John and
Justin gesticulates to Whitney and then to me.
Okay.
So sorry. For the non-visual.
both of the other 2 people that I'm talking to coordinate things with other people to where if you're reading similar sources, once you get to the point, like you can read auxiliary sources, but to have similar like primary ones, it's just helpful to be on the same page.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Especially when you're co-teaching, because you and Gabby co-teach a ton. Like that's the jam. on Wednesday nights.
And we do multiple styles. So we do one style. So the way our teaching series is set up is that it's a series of 3 over a part of the story, and then that keeps repeating. And so sometimes it's where I teach one and then she has to follow up my teaching, which is kind of a normal way. Sometimes we're teaching together at the same time, but then sometimes we're teaching the same thing to different audiences, which that gets even crazier with the coordination you have to have. In all those different ways, we just thought, that helps us.
Adding that continuity. Yeah.
And we meet together to go over different things and stuff. But yeah, so Bible Project classrooms, and it's been really fun. So one of the fun things, one of the things I've always loved video games. And as I've gotten older, they become more and more of a wasted time and a dumb thing. And one of the things I've found to be really that I enjoy is playing some of the games that I've loved for a long time. So like World of Warcraft and Minecraft have always been games that are relatively mindless, and they're like meditative. Like you play them and you're not really paying attention to them. And I will listen to those kind of podcasts. So it's fun because I do way more research or studying than I would normally do for teachings, because I'll just spend a lot of my free time kind of playing a game, but mostly listening through to like seminary classes while I'm doing it. So
semi-redemptive use of
semi-redemptive
redemptive use. I mean, I don't know.
Like, it's like,
does
well,
that
it went
time
from a
need to be
waste of
redeemed?
time, like you considered it a waste of time, to study for your teaching.
Yeah, and it's a relaxing thing, because one of the things that I've found, which maybe some listeners have found this, probably because what they're probably doing right now to us is what I do to the podcast. So I'm just justifying their...
Everyone is sitting in a meditative state right now.
No, you're probably, listeners, you're probably
driving,
mowing,
walking,
driving, doing dishes, wandering. Like you're probably
Mowing
doing
in
something.
mid-November, it's ridiculous back.
Well, not right now, but like when in general.
right now, yeah. I
that's
mowed,
true.
I mowed this weekend.
That's true.
So.
You did?
Wow.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, a lot of people use podcasts as a way to in a way redeem what they're doing, to go, hey, I have to do this thing, but I want to be thinking. Running is a lot of times like I'll listen to podcasts on run or something. So it's one of the ways. But when I've talked to other people who play games, one of the fascinating things is that the game, there will be times where I remember content because of a part in the game, and it is connected, and I will never disconnect it ever. And so it's just fun. So it like spatially connects things virtually, which is weird. So there's that. There's the Bible Project podcast, or classroom specifically. So if you're somebody who likes listening to things while you're doing stuff, they're crazy. It's like, you've done a couple of them.
So much content.
They're like 40, 30-minute sessions on like 3 chapters. Or something of the Bible.
And also you feel like you can listen to that and not watch what's going on and watch a different screen? Or do you have both things happening?
2 screens.
Okay.
Yeah. And they'll often, and like one of the fun parts about both of those games is they're not, like if somebody's experience or idea of games are like Fortnite or a game that's high intensity that you need to be present in, I stop all the time, or I'll like pause it and I'm writing notes, and all of a sudden I'm like lost on a blue letter Bible chain of like ideas or something like that. So or I'll like replay something. So I'm like, oh, something intense happened in the game and I like wasn't paying enough attention, or it just seemed interesting enough that I want to re-listen to it and remind myself what it was. So there's that. And then other media, one of the other medias that I was made really aware that I was meditating on it was Clancy, the new album by 21 Pilots, which I really love.
Okay.
So I listen to that while I run. Almost every time I run right now, I listen to that full album. So I've listened to it.
It's called Clancy
by
21
Pilots.
I thought you were going to say Tom Clancy. You were really into...
No, I've never read or listened to Tom Clancy.
Okay, so you just used a phrase. You said it made you aware that you were meditating on it. Like tease that out.
So one of the first times I remember describing meditation to a student, he was a cross-country runner, and I was trying to demystify meditation, because I think it comes to us in the West as this Eastern, like, like you're this like
emptying of self, that sort of thing. It's a stigmatized concept.
Even though it's a very biblical, like read through Proverbs and Psalms, it's a very biblical idea. And so to help this teenager understand it, I was like, have you ever listened to music while you run? And he's like, oh, definitely. I'm like, have you ever like sat with a lyric over and over again while you run? Yeah, definitely. I'm like, that's meditating. You're meditating. You're taking an idea, a concept, and you're just going over and over and over again. So a lot of the ways that people use music is the ways that the Bible says we should use it in meditating. And so I was running while listening to the album the other day, and I don't remember why I was made aware of this. It was some connection I made in my mind where I was like, oh yeah, I've been listening to this album every time I run. Like I know this album so well. It came out in like summer, and I've probably listened to it, maybe 70 times, the whole album in that time. I'm like, And I think I'd even started to notice a couple of the connections in my life where I would use that as a frame to think about the world. And I was like, oh, I'm like interpreting it through the lens of this album that I'm listening to.
Well, that's a profound like meta narrative on meditation, and what it produces is we allow that we ask this question about what's been forming you, and that's a really appropriate answer because you're like, I've realized that this music that I'm listening to is shaping how I view different aspects or areas of life. You're being formed by it. And I love that you can also say like unintentionally, I was formed until I realized how often, oh my word, how often that happens.
Unintentionally.
So unintentionally. Yeah. Where people don't even realize that their worldview perception is being formed by X, Y, or Z.
And it helped that it was the same thing. So I think like say it was a TV show, when you watch an entire TV show, because it's not repeating, you might not realize it as much, but because it was the same album and I just all of a sudden become aware of like, I was just doing the math. Like I run every other day, 5 kilometers, and I listen to this entire album the entire time. And I do that every other day. And I've been doing that for a long time. I'm like, I started adding it up. I was like, oh, that means that there's been a lot of times. And so, yeah. And I'm like, it has some really good themes. So it's an album about mental health, about positive outlooks on life. There's a lot of like Christian motifs to their music. If you don't know anything about 21 Pilots.
Are they believers?
They are. So it's always like
they don't espouse that it's not a Christian band per se.
Yeah,
but
they're not
they
an evangelical
believers.
worship band.
Yeah.
They're so like you can find videos of Tyler Joseph, the lead singer, singing "O Come, O Come Emmanuel" to his church congregation. He started by playing like on a Sunday morning or Wednesday night with his youth group or something. If you listen to their albums over and over again, especially Vessel, one of their albums, it's so explicitly like about belief, and they see their main audience as people that have bad mental health. So like even the most recent one, there's an interesting one that this is probably where I realized I was meditating on it, was they have a song, and the music video is fascinating. So it's a song about addiction and about overcoming it and about falling back. And in the music video, he's looking at himself and he has long hair, and he like shaves it off, which is a motif they use in their music videos. And the idea is when you're fighting an addiction, if somebody's been through AA or they're even the coins, you're trying to like go so long without relapsing. And then when you relapse, you feel like you lost everything. Like it's all gone.
Like there's nothing that you've gained in that period of sobriety. Like,
you just undid it all.
Yep.
And so like they use the visual of his hair growing out. And when he relapses in the song, he's like shaving his head. And it was such a powerful visual. And he's like, they do a thing where he's singing into the mirror, and the mirror is him with long hair and he's has short hair. And he's like talking to himself. And they have lines in the song where he says, he says like, it's a song about like, I wish I could remember the exact lyrics, but it says something like, it's been 25 times, it's a backslide. And so he's saying like, it's not once that I've done it, it's not 25 times that it failed. And then it gets to the point in the song where he says, I've run out of excuses for why I am this way. And I was like, what a potent line about somebody. And for him, he's talking about mental health addiction of, I think it's self-harm specifically, or just suicidal ideation is like what he's talking about. But I think any kind of sin, any kind of heartache, any way that you fail to follow Jesus, that line of, I've run out of excuses for why I am this way.
Yeah.
Like, that is a powerful line to think about.
That's heavy, weighty stuff. And 21 Pilots, I haven't listened to them a ton, but they have such a unique sound. Very, very unique. And so it's somewhere between rock and some spoken word rap.
It's all over the place. They have like ukulele, like upbeat ukulele songs.
Very
they
unique
rap.
sound.
Yeah.
So intense, high intensity often their songs are, not always. So
I appreciate them. Another reason I appreciate them is their albums that are still meant to be listened to as albums, where a lot of Spotify has taken over to where it's individual songs. And you don't get 20, like the reason this album's called Clancy, now I'm just talking about music, but you can tell I've been meditating on it. The reason it's called Clancy is they have stories in their songs. And this is the final of 5 albums about a story that they've been telling about a character named Clancy. And so not only is it an album that tells a story, but it's 5. I mean, you think of this Bible put together, stories within stories telling a story. And that's what they've done with these albums. So
that speaks, I mean, that's kind of the analogy I use in Bible 101 with the Ahsoka TV show, but just as the context Like you can listen to that album and appreciate it, but the more context you have,
Yep.
the better you understand what's happening.
Yep.
Same with individual songs in it out of an album. You can appreciate it, but more context, the better.
Yeah, there's a line,
So-
there's lines that then throw back. Like the end of the album ends with a line that's from like 3 albums earlier that was said. And you're like, oh, they're making a connection. And like, how often does the Bible say something? And then you're like, oh, they're doing something.
Yeah, but in order to see those connections, you have to listen to it 70 times.
Yep.
You have to be formed by and shaped by that.
Yep.
And so it all comes back to biblical interpretation and
It
hermeneutics.
comes back
right?
to Bible 101, it sounds like. Yeah.
That's what
It
it
does.
is, of course.
It does
So,
when it's Bible Project and that you're listening to. It does.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So cool. Well, we want to get to Sunday's service, but we got Dave's tidbit. It's just a factoid, a learning thing.
Learning factoid.
Yeah, a learning factoid. Done a lot of stuff. This is a historical, just cool thing. But in the early 2000s, the U.S. Treasury decided that they didn't decide. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of processes, that they were going to reintroduce gold coins. You remember like the Sacagawea dollar?
Yeah.
That sort of stuff, gold coins. The way that they chose to do that, though, is that they made it publicly available for purchase on their website with free shipping. So like if you want to circulate, some dollar coins, you can go and purchase dollar coins on our website, on the U.S. Treasury website with free shipping.
Okay.
What year was this?
It's early 2000s.
Okay.
OATs. So, OATs, 00s. Guess what happened? Like, think about this. Is that like, oh, that's a neat idea, right?
Sure.
Credit card rewards. If you're purchasing money with a credit card, so you can go on the U.S. Treasury, max out your credit card, get $14,000 worth of coins. They ship them to your house.
Fascinating.
You go deposit in your bank, pay off your credit card, and get those rewards. People racked up millions of miles on their credit cards. People racked up so much. I read a 14-year-old Reddit post about a guy. He's like, yeah, I do this. I'm putting about $80,000 a month on my credit cards. I'm earning about $600 in rewards because these are the 3 credit cards that I'm maximizing. He's like, ultimately, they know that we're doing this. This is actually just the Treasury trying to move circulation to the Federal Reserve, at which point I realized I don't understand banking. But,
I realized that at the very beginning of our conversation.
But yeah, people were just like cashing out like crazy.
Huh.
One of those, like the connection, when I heard it at first, I was like, oh yeah, that's, that makes so much sense. So yeah, you can look it up with dollar coins purchased and free shipping and things like that. But just a really interesting little fact moment. So one of my favorite. They tried to do this, like get it into circulation. It didn't work. So
it's a great reminder that no matter how many times you think, how could this go wrong? Humans will find a way.
Oh my word! Sometimes very exploitative. Yeah. But I think, the rumor, one was 4 million miles was the most that someone kind of tended to earn. 4 million reward miles. And so she's flying free for the rest of her life, for sure. First grade upgrades, and first class upgrades and all that stuff. So I'm hopeful at some point that I'll like catch on to one of those or see one of those before it's hatched. Yeah.
Not 14 years later.
Yeah.
Hatched. That was a weird...
Well, yeah,
I liked
it's like a life exploit, right? Like a little
early 2000s is 20 years later.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that long ago. I don't know.
We're pretty little, so take advantage of that.
So, but it'll still happen.
Wow.
So
it's
crazy.
Anyway, Sunday service, the Harvest Festival, baptisms, baptisms, and that celebration. So, which was wonderful. It was so cool to just see how everything kind of come together for this Sunday planning as well. In that layout, and it was neat because I even remember Whitney when. John and I laid out this series, and we only put 4 verses on this as the Harvest Festival because we were like, if there's going to be another 10 baptisms or 12 baptisms, John, you're going to get 10 minutes to preach or something like that. Yeah. So he certainly got more time than that.
So I had the mini sermons in there.
Yeah, he added a little sermons before the sermons.
That,
So, which was good. It was good words to be able to address just through the Spirit with trunk or treat, but also politics and the election and all that stuff. So.
He also got to back up a little bit and dig in a little bit more we got to recover a couple verses that you had to
I dropped in 2 minutes. Yeah. So I just summed it all up under the title maturity and went for it. So I'm glad he was able to go back and put a little flesh on those bones.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's a really profound thing that Paul,
is.
like, just the courage of Paul and Barnabas going back into those communities.
Yeah.
This is about the time in Acts where we forget Barnabas. Like, he's about to leave anyway and just become Paul for his second missionary journey. But I got to keep mentioning him because he's still along.
He's still along.
Barney's going.
I love Barnabas.
So
I always think of Jed Haas.
yeah, son of encouragement. Like, yeah.
I think if I met Barnabas, I'm almost positive it would just feel like
Meeting Jed?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain.
Your modern day Jed.
Yeah.
Or Jed's the modern day Barnabas.
Yeah.
I also think that, part of the reason we only put 4 verses here is because we were eking into 15 and trying to cut up 15. And it was like, if baptisms arise in a large way, 15 is one of those that we want to.
It's a pretty profound chapter now when we get to the Jerusalem Council and things like that. So,
coming up.
So thoughts or takeaways, especially I think, the celebration is awesome. The celebration of the believers. And that was kind of the last point, but the majority of John's message was spent in the first 4 verses about returning and encouraging and strengthening, building up the disciples in Lystra and Iconium and Derbe and things like that. So any standout points?
I think so. What was it that he named it taking care of the harvest, right? For the first couple verses of it. But I think too, so he went to deer hunting as like his illustration for this sermon. But I'm going back to like planting tips with Tim and thinking about, you're a gardener. Well, we're all gardeners here.
We're gardeners here. Yes.
Like the last 10% of gardening is taking care of the harvest at like the last bit. And that is the hardest part for me to do. So spring rolls around, the snow is gone. I'm like super excited to prep beds and get stuff in the ground, right?
It's exciting.
And then, weeding is, sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't. But it's amazing how like plants want to grow and they will grow. Kind of given a lot of adversity, they'll still try to grow, right?
Yeah.
Which made John's comment about his raised beds at his house in Minnesota so striking. Those plants wanted to grow and you killed them. So, all right.
I planted green beans in between my 2 patches of onions, and the green beans just took over. They were supposed to be pole beans. I didn't get a trellis up for them to go on, so they just went all over everything. And I thought I had lost most of my onion harvest. And then went to like clear the bed out, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's onions all over this place. Took them out. Onions have to dry. I put them on a screen and they dry for a while. So they were sitting there Saturday, and I was like, the last 10% is cleaning these things off and getting them in our cold room so that we can use them. And likewise, sometimes we think about evangelism and go make the word known, but actually coming back and strengthening and spending time with people and doing that, the piece of taking care of the harvest is a lot of work too, And I was just like, oh yeah, gardening is very similar. It's such a good illustration, gardening for me is, and taking care of that last little bit so that it's useful.
So that's purposeful.
So it's purposeful.
We had veggies that we grew and we never used them.
Yeah.
They just died.
Yeah.
That's where my mind was going.
Yeah.
There has to be an intentionality at the step after the step after the step, like, okay, I bought the seeds, I cultivated the plants, I grew them, I fertilized, took care, I harvested, cleaned out the beds, and then the fruit just wasn't used because we didn't plan to make borscht quickly enough and our beets went bad, or something like that. It's just a fascinating reality of then what church work looks like. And I think I was saying even before this that I was reflecting on the fact that, Paul is coming through. He's strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraging them to continue their faith, and saying or teaching that through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. He's stepping into a community and saying those things and then leaving, but we're the ones in that community. Like we're not going to other communities and doing this stuff. And so that role of making use of the fruit, is that the right way to say it? Using the fruit? It's not burying.
This is where the analogy is hard.
This is where it may break down a little bit.
Not burying the talent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And investing what we've been given.
Well, and didn't even Keely, was it her? Was it the highlight video where she talks about so Woodlands Church put on Trunk or Treat, and I think one of her lines in the recap video is, the fruit of the Spirit was able to be experienced by our community coming in, like the love, the gentleness, the care that the Spirit has grown in our people was then available for use to be experienced by the community that stepped in. So is it something along those lines of it's, so yeah, the analogy breaks down, but.
Well, let's keep stretching this analogy a little, because I'm processing right now. We talk so often about the purpose of, we're faithful and we trust God to produce fruit in and through us, right? Like we don't judge our faithfulness against our fruitfulness, that sort of stuff. But God promises to produce fruit, John 15. There will be, but fruit's supposed to do something.
I think of saltiness.
Yeah, like it produces
like if the salt
something.
loses its salt, what good is it for? I almost think like you collect I collected a bunch of tomatoes. And then, so where my mind was going this whole time was, my garden did kind of bad this year, but my son also decided he didn't like any of the stuff I grew this year.
That'll happen.
And then I lost all motivation. I was like, I'm not going to go weed if the things that grow are just going to, like I had a bag of tomatoes in my fridge that I did nothing with. And that makes me think to like, well, if you're not going to do anything with it. So that leads me in my mind to equipping the saints. Go, okay, there's this harvest. And so if the harvest in some way is maybe a metaphor to God preparing people for us to meet, to point to him so they can know him. And there's also this fruit that we grow of the Spirit of our life change and our character. And so is a fruit salad
but it's ultimately,
is that like equipping the saints? Is the fruit salad like doing something?
It's ultimately for other people. Fruit is, right? Like it's for our good.
It's a blessing that you've been, it goes to Abraham, I'll bless you so you can bless the nations.
Yeah.
So is a fruitful church just one that's enjoying love and joy and peace and patience, kindness, goodness, is it just enjoying that fruitfulness? Or is, I could have gotten there. So I mean, it's just, I feel
we
like
always forget
say
the
all
last
9
few.
of them a lot. So
no, we don't. We say the first 3 a lot.
Love, joy, peace. And
then we get to 6 sometimes.
We have a verbal ellipses. Or usually we use our hands or something like that to say, and so on and so forth. But anyway, is it just that we're enjoying that fruit, or is it that fruit is then supposed to be producing something in us, like perseverance or gifts of the Spirit, or more followers of Jesus, or I don't know.
It seems like the connection between them is very linked. Like it seemed like I think of passages in the Old Testament where God is critiquing the kingdom of Israel, which the analogy I'm seeing in my head is the same. It's the same connection where you have Abraham and the kingdom blessed so that they could bless, and instead Israel doesn't bless the nations. They become a curse to the nations, just as Abraham becomes a curse to people he interacts with. And so if the role of Israel was to be a blessing to everyone, the role of the church is probably similar. And so that fruit is both something we enjoy and participate in, but also the very way in which the good news is spread. In my mind, that's how I'm like imagining it. But
and this is still tied to the analogy in my mind, although it's probably a stretch of like the fruit. So last year, my little tomatoes, what are those called? The grape tomatoes? Cherries. Were bumper crop. But you really can't, how many can you really eat before your tongue starts to acidify and
Ask my
hurt?
daughters. My goodness, they consume those things by the bushel. It's insane. I don't bring any in the house. They just eat them off. Yep,
go get lunch in the garden today. That's amazing. That's amazing. So. But so I made fire roasted tomatoes on a grill and then froze them, so I don't have to do the canned ones, whatever. That are now being used to feed the small group that's going to come to our house tonight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To share a meal at the table, and then they're going to go out and, I don't know.
I'm going to keep going with that now because I'm realizing. So when we talk about fruit,
this is the podcast where Dave, Justin, and Whitney go off on gardening.
Well, it's great.
It's great.
It is helpful to think about.
It's also the sermon series. So
that fruit, when we talk about fruitfulness, we were talking about in a positive way, where there's fruitfulness that's also negative. Like there's the fruit that's of evil, that's of sin. And so when I'm thinking of my garden and the idea that I grow this fruit that William did not want and how it was so useless, instead of me going, oh, William's the problem, and why can't he just eat the things I grow? Instead, that made me, as you were talking, make the connection of going back to the conversation of how do we redeem time, of if my life is spent growing fruit that is not pleasing to God or is not useful in any way, man, that makes me think of old age, of tending fruitfulness and going, do you lose motivation? Do you hit a point in your life where you're like, well, like there's just not really any, like nobody wants the fruit that I have. So
Yeah.
why keep it up? Because that's how I felt in my garden was like, I'm not going to weed and protect fruit that is useless. That's a waste of my time to do. So
this might be a jump too, but coming back then to Paul returning to the church and celebrating and sharing the news of what fruitfulness, like they had sent him at expense to the church and came back and said, here's what happened. Here's the fruitfulness that what's happening around the world. And then I think of the young lady, I was at 1045 service that pointed back to Jeannie Swanstrom's small group who talk about old age and fruitfulness.
It brought tears to my eyes.
I was just bawling and I was sitting behind Debbie and Don and there was just a wave of happy tears, but like amazing tears in that and through that story. So
to see the fruitfulness of a life spent following Jesus.
Producing fruit that it's pleasing to God and nourishing all kinds of believers.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I hear in this that I think that we need to lean into more as a church, I think we've been doing this better, but that is the fruitfulness of our gifts is also seen in the ministry that's being accomplished overseas through our sent missionaries. Like we have Paul and Barnabas's sent that are across the world doing ministry, and our faithfulness in giving and tithes that's going to that, and our faithfulness in prayers, our faithfulness in continuing to cultivate a church that's willing to support missionaries. I mean, that's a culture thing, right? That's producing fruit across the world. And we should be seeing that and celebrating that. And I shouldn't just be judging like, how fruitful are you, Dave, based off of, the interactions or conversations I'm having, but based off of the community that I'm a part of and the work that church is doing. So,
because you go back to thinking about the church as a body.
Corporate ownership.
There are certain body parts that aren't going to see their fruitfulness as relevantly as you might, because you preach a word and people respond, right? And so I think there's another level of like, as a church body, of celebrating what the church body is doing and being able to say, if you're a lesser, you don't preach on a Sunday morning, or if all you do is welcome people.
There's a lot of air quotes going on here.
Yeah. Please hear the air quotes. And all you do is welcome people. Like you're still an extension of Christ's hand to the person that's walking in, or face, or whatever. And what are you welcoming them into? A larger body that's doing a lot of things. And you can play a part in it.
Okay, super ignorant question here. Biblically ignorant. I think you're going to have some good thoughts on this, and Justin, you might too. Do we equate fruit of spirit with fruit in John 15?
I do. You did. You connected this for me a long time ago.
Justin.
I
think it's
back to Genesis of like the be fruitful and multiply, and that doesn't just mean make a bunch of babies.
Yeah. That it like gets changed into character.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. But
is it exclusive? Is that is what the fruit is? The fruit of being attached to the vine is the production of these inherent communal qualities of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness,
by exclusive,
Dave, you're the one that can get through all of them. Will you just get through all 9 of them? You just verbalize them.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. So.
Because it was, is that Malachi where he says
Malachi.
I looked for
the Italian prophet.
I looked for righteousness and I saw bloodshed. I looked for justice or whatever. It's one of the two. And I saw injustice or something. And so God's looking out for fruit. And but what's interesting is it's not a one-to-one correlation to the fruit of the Spirit. And so I don't think you can say it's exclusive as in these 9 things.
These 9,
only like hope isn't in there. Which I think is probably...
Righteousness isn't in there either.
Wisdom.
Yeah. So I don't think it's an exclusive list in the same way that sin lists aren't meant to be exclusive lists.
Sure.
Like, well, here's one list and anything not on this list I can
think
do.
Very few lists in Scripture, if any, are exclusive.
Yeah, they're not meant to be.
Yeah.
They're like, even in the way that you're like, da. Like, that's the problem is if you listed everything, no one would remember them all. And even with these 9, we don't get to the end.
And it's just a limit of language too, I think.
Yeah.
So you just can't encapsulate everything.
So I think they're connected, but I don't think they're exclusively connected. Like I don't think the only fruit that it would be the fruit of the Spirit.
But the fruit is not then, okay, never mind.
But I also think the fruit of the Spirit is broader than we sometimes make them out to be, because I don't think they're just individual character traits. So like take for instance, one that always sticks out to me is peace, and how peace could be your internal sense of that the world is going to be okay. Like things are going to be fine because God is sovereign and he has providence. Peace could be your peace with God, that you have peace because you know that God is actually no longer your enemy through Jesus. Peace could be relational harmony between human beings rather than conflict. So like even already, I'm sure there's probably even more things that peace could be. But you can look at peace and see there's a lot of dimensionalities to
But don't you think Paul meant one of those things when he wrote that? I mean, that's an exegetical question, I think. Not a what could this be, but what is it? Like what is Paul talking about?
If anything, though, he would have, thinking about the context of the passage, if he was going to mean anything, it would be relational peace.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
But it's also in the context of the gospel, like Galatians. So peace with God could have been on his mind. I think Paul was also really smart and able to do a lot of stuff at once. And if not, the Holy Spirit comes in. And
well, I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 12 and 13 and just this constant refrain that the gifts of the Spirit, which are not equated with the fruits of the Spirit, but I think that they're related under the umbrella category. The work of the Spirit in the community is done for the sake of the community. Gifts are given for the sake of the community. And so I encourage this. One of my spiritual gifts is faith. And it was really helpful when I had someone sit down and be like, Dave, you do not have that gift for yourself. You have that gift for the community. You have the gift for the people that you are walking alongside who are walking in faith-depleted states. You have that for them, not for you. Like, it's not like look at me, cool. But I think the same thing for the fruit of the Spirit. Like, the fruit of the Spirit is produced for the sake of the community. You're not giving love so that you are a loving person. You are giving love so that others can experience love. Peace, you have peace in relation to one another, but you also share that peace as they're walking through brokenness and loss and tragedy. And so
that's okay. So that's really powerful. And I think of a line I've heard about counseling is that one of the jobs of a counselor is to have hope for someone who doesn't have hope for themselves. So you're walking through them basically saying, you're going to be okay. Things are going to turn out better. Your circumstances, your internal life, whatever it is they're counseling them through, I'm going to be the hope for you while you walk through this. And so then to expand that in a spiritual sense, in a communal sense to the fruit of the Spirit is I think, really powerful. To be that for each other while we grow together is really cool.
In community. And all of those are relational things, right?
Yeah, guess what this comes back to on a regular basis, Dave?
Community.
But also just like your relationship with God was never intended to end with you, right? Like when we are conformed to the image of Christ, we're conformed into the image of all these things that we just talked about, the fruit of the Spirit, even we have gifts because they're part of who God is too, but they're for our good, praise God, they're for his glory, praise God, but they're for others. Like that is, there's an outworking that I think is so easy to.
I'm teaching the meaning of marriage class right now, and so I'm processing marriage a lot. So let me just spin two different threads out and see if they connect anywhere. But how often do we think about like, okay, Jesus came, died on the cross, and set me free from my sin, restored my relationship with him so that I can be in the garden. And like we have this picture of returning to like us as Adam in the garden, and we keep forgetting, then God looks at that and he's like, it's not good that man should be alone, right? Like that's the garden moment where Adam's in perfection and God's like, no, I created you for community because you're created in my image. Then I think, okay, that's an expression of marriage. And then so how profound is it that Jesus, in response to the Sadducees who are struggling with resurrection, says that no, in the life to come, there's not going to be marriage.
But there's family.
And that's faith family. That's that community. I think that's the relational intimacy that God created Eve to provide for Adam in the garden. That gets experienced at an entire communal level, church level, in eternity with people. And so I've always wrestled with that marriage, passages that I would like to strike from scripture because they complicate my neat understanding of how the world works. But that passage shouldn't shrink our view of the goodness of marriage, expand our view of the goodness of eternity and community that we have for that. So, Christ follower, you are redeemed to be with people. That starts, I think John has said it well recently, it starts at your home address. Like that's where the people you need to be, but then it expands to groups that you're part of, whether it's life groups or community groups or care groups, divorce care grief share, things like that. It expands into these groups, DLGs, transformational community, on and on.
Sorry, I'm like on a little tangent now where I'm looking at the passage and how they went to encourage, and then you have Barnabas, who's the son of encouragement. And like that seems like a pretty easy parallel to your given gifts for community. Like, oh, the son of encouragement goes around encouraging churches. And then that led me to the question of like, what does Paul do without the son of encouragement? How does that go? I'm like, I don't even know. I've never looked at that question before.
That's a great question.
But I'm curious like what his journeys look like without Barnabas there. And that's probably way too deep of a question to ask. I don't think I can skim and note and read it.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, like are you asking, did Barnabas affect the way that ministry? I doubt Scripture.
Like, is there a
speaks to
shift? Like, would you see a shift between Paul when he's with Barnabas and Paul when he's not with Barnabas?
Yeah, like does he not return to communities again? Does he not? What happens there?
Yeah, I'm just curious. So I don't know. Maybe someone can read that really closely and give me an answer. Or you're probably gonna be preaching through it at some point. So
I figured out. Yeah. John had wondered in the prep process for this passage because it's so striking what happens in Derbe, that he goes to Derbe and it says he makes disciples. Whereas, certainly in Pisidian Antioch, it went and there were many who believed, but it doesn't say that any became disciples. And there, he says then he travels back and encourages the disciples. So clearly they became disciples. But John had wondered if something happened at Derbe that was so clear that it made Paul think, oh, there's a missing component here. Like, oh, now I see what discipleship can be. I need to go back and really establish these communities, appoint these elders, provide context for following Jesus-ness to take place. I thought it was an insightful.
All the things that when you're reading a story and you want to know more about it, like how many times you're like, what was the conversation here? When you think about the 4 or 5 verses that we studied this Sunday, and you think about all of the conversation that happened in between traveling to those places and the conversation that happened when you're in those places and what it actually looked like to strengthen the disciples and encourage them and so many things that we can ask questions about but not necessarily know.
Yeah. And one of the things I think too is that, when months are summarized, Paul's first missionary journey was probably 2 years. Travel and different things like that. And so when years or months are summarized, it always looks so much cleaner than when it's lived. And I think about our process of encouraging the saints and just how messy that looks, and like schedules and like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to text you. And like,
or any mission trip, we've all been on mission trips. So that's just making me realize, oh man, if I had to summarize one of the mission trips I'd been on in a paragraph, like if you told my life story and it was like, and then Justin went on this mission trip and then he did work here at this place and this is what happened and then he went on this mission trip and you were like, you gave me a paragraph for each part of my life. Like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, you leave out a lot of the nuance and the, Can
I offer?
You did summarize a mission trip this summer and it lit my daughter on fire enough to be like, I want to go wherever that is. I want to do that this summer. Can I do that this summer? Was that 7th graders that he was talking about?
Oh, awesome.
So
that's encouraging.
I was going to say I'm as good as Luke. That's way too much of an overstatement. No, that's very exciting.
Well, I think a good counterbalance in my mind for that is that I often want to avoid making things seem better than they are. And so I'm often fairly, like everything didn't go great, but these are some things I caveat it a lot.
I've noticed that, like with serving, you'll say, like, if you're coming and you're taking care of a group of 4s, it's not going to feel super spiritual. It's going to be exhausting.
Yeah. And I think it's decent to caveat it and to not set the expectation that like, oh, it's the Instagram lens, right? Like you just constantly see church through the lens of Instagram. We have to encourage too, and we have to celebrate what God is doing. And we shouldn't be afraid of saying like, this is incredible. Sure, there were hardships, but let's look at where God was clearly moving and working. And focusing on that celebrating it's a really, really good thing. So,
yeah, I think every mission trip I've ever been on had incredibly depressing or like difficult moments in them for various reasons.
So it's good to be honest about that. Yeah.
But like, I don't think I'd ever frame them even mostly in that light. So yeah, how many things even the he gets stoned and it's like 2 sentences to like what would become the story I told every human I ever met. Like, do you want to hear a story? Like, I don't know, like you think of the table conversation, like, well, this one time, I don't know. And it's all, that's what it gets, which is just fascinating.
Oh man.
They stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city. Not even a full sentence.
No.
You talked about like
He
when
gets
people
up and dusts himself off.
Oh yeah, when John was talking about like when people saw him and thought, wait, wasn't he dead already? One, I was thinking about how I have to always go back to when Judas kisses Jesus and the idea that like they didn't have pictures. They didn't like, you didn't know who someone was and what they looked like at all the same as we do. We can have pictures and know, and like people don't change that much because of hairstylists and our ability to groom. It's like in people, I just think like the difficulty with which you would have to know who someone is so much harder in ancient context.
Sure.
So I think you could be a lot sneakier. Like I think it allowed criminals to do things that they can't nearly do as much anymore. Now the internet has that anonymity, but anyway, total aside. But so like I think of that context, but I do think almost more of Paul's emotion of walking through the town of the people who had tried to kill him and how that like, I don't know. There's a lot in these stories that get a sentence.
Yep. There's a lot going on. So, which is this encouragement to continue processing, to dig in and set time aside. And whether it's in Acts and the narrative, there's so much when you're reading story in order to process the characters and the arc and things like that. But there's also, just even looking ahead to the winter and being in 1 Peter, there's going to be a ton to process in that because it's a incredibly nuanced, punchy book. And so, we're going to continue doing that here in Cabin Conversations. You're invited to do that, listeners, with us. And also just as you go along on your own. So, cool. Hey, we got to wrap up. So, this has been Cabin Conversations. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.